Today on the Becoming Zion podcast, we're going to talk about the 6 things that I was worried about when converting to the church. Now, obviously, as I just said, I'm a convert. There were a lot of things that I encountered on the internet and among people that I knew that made me kind of think twice before joining. Naturally, I overcame those things to become baptized and become a full member. But I want to go over the things I encountered and hopefully provide a way to disarm them in case you were, in fact, or someone you know are, in fact, looking and investigating into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, let's hear it. This is going to be interesting with a year of retrospect to look back at, kind of the big things that almost stopped you.
Okay, so yeah, number 1, I think on the list is acceptance. I had no idea if I was going to fit in, or I was terrified, in fact, to come into a meeting house, and I've got tattoos. The media that I consumed prior to investigating the church was not rooted in Christ. I was really worried about, living up to this notion of a Latter-day Saint that I had in my head, and worried what people would think.
I remember when you guys walked into church for the first time. You walked into the chapel, and your wife said, "Oh, good, there are lots of kids here." Just like, I remember she was worried, and maybe you were too, about just like, oh my gosh, how are we going to control our kids? Expecting to go sit down, and it's like in this echoey hall, and we're going to speak Latin for an hour, right? And like this child is going to scream, and suddenly everybody turns and stares at you.
That's points, right? They're all going to reach their hands out and say,
"Sinner!"
I mean, that's exactly right. It seems silly in retrospect now, but that was exactly what we were worried about, because I think our church experiences when we were young, outside of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was, as a child, you're supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to just sit there and not fidget and just listen to what was happening. And, ideally, my kids would be listening to what the speaker was saying each week.
Figure that one out, let me know.
But we were relieved that we went in, and we had 3 kids at the time. We were like, oh, our kids are going to throw such a fit and cause such a disruption. And they did. But everybody else's kids did too.
Also, you live in an awesome ward for it. Your ward is so fun to walk into. I think every ward in the church should do this. When you walk into your ward, the primary kids, line the entry there is like, "Welcome to church, sister so and so, whoever."
Oh, that's cool.
I think it's cool. It's like the the 5-year-old little league soccer games, how the parents make the little tunnel. That's how I feel going into church in your ward. It's all the primary kids in the foyer there welcoming everybody. I think every ward should do that.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm just used to it now, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, that was the best thing ever.
So if for other investigators, there's no reason at all to worry about this. We weren't, I don't think, your cookie cutter, what you think of whenever you think of a Latter-day Saint. But what we grew to find is that cookie cutter, that doesn't represent most of Latter-day Saints. Like it's a big tent. There is a lot of space for a bunch of people. And I think, I'm not saying everyone you meet is going to like you, but there's a good chance that you're going to find a home in the church.
They should, right? Everyone should like you, but that's life, right?
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
Humans, they're mortals.
Exactly.
One thing that I have heard a lot is when you go into church, because everybody dresses in a white shirt and tie and a dress and things like that, it can be easy for people to feel like they're being judged. And I don't know how many times I've heard from people who are not coming to church anymore, or new to church, or who came once and don't come anymore, and they felt like, oh, everybody was just staring at me. And I always think like, man, if somebody came, wearing street clothes, I'm sure people are looking back at you. But they're not judging you. 99.9% of the time, they're like, "Whoa, we got to go figure out who that person is and go welcome."
Make sure
like,
they feel welcome.
No one would. I'm sure there's somebody.
Sure.
But very few people would say, "Oh my gosh, how dare you show up in shorts and flip flops? You're the most interesting person there, and everybody wants to talk to you."
Yeah, precisely. I would agree with that 100%. And I would have thought the former. The first thing you'd said, where people are looking at me, I'm like, oh gosh, what am I doing wrong or anything? But they're probably just like getting the confidence to come up and talk to you. They're probably just like wondering like, hey, I should go talk to that person. Because whenever someone new is in our ward, that's what I'm trying to do.
It is tough. Yeah. When I've attended other churches, it's easier to feel like maybe you fit in there because there's just so much diversity in who's there. And I don't mean ethnic diversity or racial diversity. I just mean like there's the dude all tatted up. There's the guy that looked like he just barely came off the street. And there's the guy in the suit. Like there's so much diversity in the types of people who are there. Whereas in the church, it feels pretty homogenous. And there are lots of different personalities and stuff, but it can feel pretty homogenous. And so it can make people feel like maybe I don't fit in here. And that's something we all got to get better at.
Yeah. What do you all have any ideas for that of how we can be less homogenous on make people feel more welcome whenever they come through the doors?
I don't know. It's tough because the obvious answer is, well, we should all stop wearing white shirts. Let's go to blue. Let's wear a polo. Let's do these things that kind of break us apart and make it not feel as homogenous. But the goal that we're trying to achieve is for the gospel to change us and to become something. And so if our Sunday best is the best we can do for the Lord, then that makes sense. And so I think that's one reason that we struggle to maybe feel as inclusive is because we do some things that are homogenous, but there's a reason why, and it's improving us.
Yeah, we're all trying to become one, right?
Yeah, well said. The second thing on my list is secrecy / the temple. And this is a spicy one, right? I think most of what negative things that have been said, at least that I've encountered online, are around the temple and the perceived secrecy.
Probably the first thing that somebody, if you told somebody, hey, I went to the Mormon church the other day, they'd be like, oh, well, did you know?
Right, exactly.
And I remember one thing you said is, there's the answer that we hear regularly, which is, it's not that the temple is secret, it's just sacred. That's right. And you kind of felt like that was a cop-out answer. And honestly, I agree. It is. I mean, when there's something that's sacred to the point that you don't talk about it in front of others, well, that is the definition of secret as well, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what that word means, is something you aren't sharing publicly. And so I think you're right. That answer does at least provide a reason why it's not secret for the sake of being secret. Mm. But you're right on that. That is kind of a cop-out answer.
Well, to be fair, I've came around to the notion of secret versus sacred myself. Like seeing what it is, because I kind of thought of what does the alternative look like? Mm-hmm. And there's a scripture, in particular Matthew 6:5. It's, when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. If we were championing and loudly broadcasting temple ordinances and everything, would it become more of a performative thing to some? Like
That's a great point.
If you were streaming it on TikTok or something like that, what does that say? So I think, like, I understand. I'm not going to say I completely understand, but I understand the notion of it being sacred to the point where you're not shouting it and maybe diluting it down by doing that publicly. Not to say, like, you can go on the church website and read all about what happens in the temple, like read all the covenants you're going to make there and everything like that. So, like, we do talk about it. We just don't stream what's happening on TikTok. And for full disclosure, I've not been through all of the ordinances yet or anything like that. So it's coming from a limited perspective.
No, I think that's a really valuable perspective for people. I remember being a lifelong member of the church when I was 18, going to the temple for the first time, or I guess 19 back in the day. That I kind of felt the same way. I kind of felt like, man, I've been a member of the church the whole time, but I was kind of nervous about, like, what am I going to experience here? And I took temple prep classes and things like that, but I still felt like, I don't even know what you're talking about, you know? They would be giving background going in the Old Testament, sharing things, and they're like, this is kind of the background you need to understand. And I just didn't know how to put that in as, like, okay, so now what? So what? Are we going to be sacrificing animals in there? I didn't know as a lifelong member of the church. And so I can understand why it would feel a little bit of apprehension about that. And I guess what I would say is that as a member of the church, so there's low church and high church. Most of what we do is low church. What we do is, people stand up, lay people, we have testimony meeting, anybody can talk. We're talking about application of the church to our daily lives. That's what most of our religion is. There's some high church that we do that is ceremonial, it's ritual, like the sacrament. It happens the same thing every time, and there's a lot of symbolism in those things. And the temple is almost all high church. It's almost all ritual and ceremony and happening the same way every time, and symbolism. There's not any stand up and bear testimony and things like that. And so I think the reason that then it is secret and sacred is that it is something that we need to learn at a certain point in our gospel progression. And it gets repeated, that ceremony gets repeated over and over for us, and it helps us to learn the higher level gospel principles that we'll need to learn.
Yeah, I had an experience one time as a missionary. We taught this lady, brought her and her family to church, and then later that evening we went by to see how she liked it. And we could tell, watching her through sacrament meeting, staring at her, right? Like we talked about, that she had a good time. Her son loved being in primary, and it was a good experience. And then we went by later that evening to ask her about it, and she cracked the door open and was like, "Oh, I'm not interested anymore, bye." And we're like, "Hang on. Like, we know you enjoyed it. What happened?" And she eventually told us, "Well, I told my family I went to your church, and they told me all sorts of stuff." And so I started making up a few things. Like, "Oh, did you hear about this and this and this?" And just totally making stuff up. And her eyes got wide. And I said, "Look, you were there. You met the people. Like, we're not doing crazy stuff. Think about the members that you know. They're not crazy, And so I think that's a big thing that can help, is just to think, okay, wait, I know all these people who go through the temple weekly or, whatever, with whatever frequency. It's not weird stuff. It's just it's simple stuff. Again, it's available on the church website to look up for anybody if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how I came to terms with it as well. It's like I've met so many amazing people through the church, and just through know them by their fruits, right? Like, just the way they are. I have no major trepidation about whenever I do go and complete my ordinances. They're knowing, like, I know what's involved. I know what's going to be asked of me, and I'm fine with making those covenants because they're really similar to the covenants that I've already made. Like, I'm already doing a lot of the things that that I'll be asked to do, and I have no fear, really.
That's a good point. We need a full episode on that next, is because if you look at the ordinances that you make during the endowment, or the covenants you make during the endowment, it's like, haven't we already promised those things?
Right.
Like, really?
Right.
For a lot of it. Anyway, that's one we should talk about.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So the next item of apprehension that I had was increased expectations / letting people down. So this one still makes me nervous. More is expected of me as a Latter-day Saint than what in the secular world. And to be clear, like, not much was expected of me in the secular world. Like, well, I had to wake up, go to work, take care of my kids. I didn't have any spiritual goals that, like, kept me acting a certain way. But yeah, I had this nervousness before I was baptized, for one thing.
Wondering if you'd fall off the horse or what?
Yeah, I'm about to make these agreements, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to them. Spoiler alert, I'm not. But and I was allergic to the hypocrisy of that. I think as a secular person, especially, I was a former atheist, right? And so I would see the hypocrisy of religious people, and I would point at it. Mm-hmm. And I have a different understanding now, I think, on this side of the fence, is that, yeah, we're all hypocrites. We really are, because we make these covenants that we know we're going to fall short about, but it's the desire and it's the momentum that we have. It's the direction that we're going that makes it worthwhile to do, and you almost have to be a hypocrite for a period of time to improve and get better.
Yeah, if you don't notice that you're doing things wrong, you're not going to change, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the fact that was a big stumbling or sticking point for you showed that you were sincere, right? If you were just like, yeah, no, I'll figure it out. I'm good. You're not going to change. You're not going to become who you need to be. And it kind of, yeah, I think it's a good point that was tough for you or something you thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I thought about that, and a big part of me didn't, and honestly, still doesn't want to like take that extra burden on.
Yeah.
Right. I will say on this side of the fence again, like it's worth it. It's worth it for the joy that you feel. It's worth it for the person that you become when following Christ. But I was very concerned about letting people down and the increased expectations that were going to be placed on me as a person.
I kind of think about it like you sign up for a half marathon or something. It's like, well, I don't really want to sign up for this, but I do want to get healthy and fast and all that. And if I sign up, then I'll be more committed, but I'm still not going to be perfect.
If marathon registrations cost half of what they do, nobody would run the marathon. It has to carry a certain weight in your pocketbook to have that commitment to it. And maybe the same is true with the gospel.
I think that kind of goes into this next point that you have, your next trepidation. But there's the quote that says, a religion that doesn't require everything of its members, it doesn't have the saving power, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. Is you really need to try and become something.
So you put down consecration. You didn't mention specifically the law of tithing. What were your thoughts on the law of tithing?
That's a really good, okay. I'm of two minds here with tithing. Prior to joining the church, it just seemed like a money-making scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, sure, yeah, you've got to give 10%, and that's really important to do. You've got to give your 10%. That's convenient, But after paying tithe, I've been a full tithe payer for a while now. The purpose it's not the purpose is to bleed every penny from the widow. It's giving tangibly something up that that you personally value. Everyone values money. Like it makes it so that we can live and everything. And by doing it every week, especially when you don't really want to, like I send the money off on the thing, and then I click the button and it's gone. You experience joy after. You don't experience it before. And I think I was skeptical of it going into it. And I was like almost maybe not rolling my eyes, but I'm like, oh gosh, when I clicked the button for the first tithe payment. But then afterwards, it was like, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Paying tithe completely makes sense, and it kind of transforms you. You get personal blessings from it. I will testify to that. I'm not saying that like you give the church $1, you'll make $2, but like you get a personal peace from doing so. And it's when you see all of the great works that the church is doing, you feel involved, you feel ownership over it. And that's one of the biggest things is you're enrolled in it in a way that you would not be if you didn't have quote unquote like skin in the game. What do you all think about that?
Yeah, it's something that has become a major issue recently, even for some people that I guess I wouldn't expect to have trouble with this. I think especially with things in the news about the SEC and the church's wealth and things like that, it has a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, I'm sacrificing paying my tithing here, and the church has so much money," and I can understand why somebody feels that way if they don't understand all of the reasons for it. And tithing really is for us and not the church. It is about our sacrifice to the Lord and not the Lord doesn't need money. Mm-hmm. He has the whole earth. He doesn't need money. But we do. Now, I will just at least mention that argument about the SEC and the church globally, because I do think it's a hot button issue for a lot of people recently.
Sure.
And I guess a few things that I'd say is I get comments very, very regularly on my missionary-focused website about this and asking about tithing and these issues. And I have a standard response that I send back every time. And it's an attachment and just a few words in the email. And the attachment is a picture of President Monson's house that he lived in for 50 plus years. Mm. It is a tiny, very, very modest, very simple, very basic home in Salt Lake City. Very basic. They spend all day, every day, for the rest of their lives. I mean, once our leaders become an apostle, it is till death. They are just exhausted running all around the globe doing missionary work. And so if that money is enriching somebody, it's not enriching the people at the top. And so the arguments that I hear about, the church is too rich, I'm like, so who is it? Whose pockets are getting lined?
Right.
The church. The reason they have so much is because nobody is sucking it out, right? And there is paid clergy in our church at the highest levels. They are paid. General authorities are paid, and those salaries are honestly very modest, especially for the work that they are doing. President Hinckley said modest in terms of executive compensation. There was a non-member who actually was given access to audit the church's books, 10, 15 years ago. And he said he felt like at the end, he said, boy, the people at the highest levels are not the highest paid people. And that's a real sign. And I thought that's pretty cool, that. And so, is the church rich? Yeah, I want it to be filthy rich because it's going to use it for good. I would have problems if maybe everybody was jet setting on private jets everywhere to go to Cancun every other week. That's just not the case. And so, that being the case, then I want the church to be filthy rich.
Sure.
I think a big issue, a lot of people compare it to secular organizations, government, right? We all pay more than 10% of our income to the government, and they don't have a surplus.
Right. Yeah,
and the people at the highest levels do get paid. So anyway, I think we compare it to those organizations and expect the same levels of misuse and corruption to exist, and they just don't,
So yeah, when investigating the church, I was really nervous about the law of consecration for the reasons that we mentioned. But after seeing it in practice and after seeing like what is asked of members and everything, I think it's something for me to aspire to. And I kind of know how I need to get my soul to look at it, but I don't think I'm there yet.
Makes sense. None of us are.
Yeah.
The next item on my list I was very concerned and nervous about my existing relationships. So I, in the 30-some years of my life, have friends or gained friends and had family that have spoke ill of the church primarily to misconceptions. And, I was from a really small town that didn't really have an LDS population, right? I was concerned about what people were going to say, like how they were going to view me. I know that that's silly, but we're looking at it now, it's silly. But at the time, I was nervous about that. Like, I remember when I told my aunt that I was moving to Utah, she said, well, you better not become a Mormon. And I'm sorry.
Sorry, Auntie.
I'm sorry
You're watching this.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. There was just a lot of, I would say, maybe prejudice against the religion for things that, I mean, I also thought were true that I no longer believe after seeing on this side. I think it's one of the most misrepresented religions on the face of the earth. And I was just nervous about what people were going to say.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody investigating the church experiences that.
Yeah, I'm happy to say that everybody's been cool. Everybody's been cool about it 100%. They've been met with curiosity more than anything else. My mother even got baptized just a few weeks ago. Like there is something to I don't know. While I think it's a reasonable emotion to have if you're investigating the church, my experience was that it ended up being nothing. Like it ended up being nothing to worry about. I am sure that there are people out there who would just like, I'll never talk to you again if you do this, just because it's a big world. But that's not what I experienced.
Yeah, I would think for everybody else, they're looking at you and say, well, I know Andy. I know he's not this. And so if he joined that church, then the church must not be this. And so it kind of drops all of their barrier, not all of them, but drops some of the barriers and says, well, maybe I could look into it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Yeah, the benefits that the gospel had on mine and my family's life were evident, I think, to everyone who was close to us. I think the next item on my list is accusations about Joseph Smith. So reading about the early church can be extraordinarily inspiring, but there's also a lot there that can provoke anxiety. Reading about like the treasure hunting accusations, the polygamy and everything, it made me nervous whenever I was reading about the church. I didn't really know how to take this stuff.
Can I ask a question then?
Yeah.
I want to jump in and ask
Sure.
something specific about that.
Yeah.
When you were taking the lessons from the missionaries, Emily and I talked frequently and saying, it's kind of odd that you're not asking some of these tough questions. Because knowing you, I know you will research everything. You're a well-studied kind of person, a studious person. And so I knew you would find that information. And so it was kind of weird for me talking with you because I thought, well, what am I going to do? Bring up? So what do you think about polygamy in this lesson, right?
Sure.
And you never really did bring up some of those issues, at least in the lessons.
Sure.
And so I was left kind of thinking, what should I do as the member missionary here? Like, what should I bring this up and ask? But you never really talked about them. Were you nervous about making an accusation or why do you suppose you didn't really talk about that?
Probably politeness. Like it seemed like a thing not to bring up. Like I didn't want to offend anyone that I was talking to. I understand now I could have probably freely brought it up and it would have been fine. But it was research that I did, myself. I was sorting through that. I saw it's really hard to determine like what is factual and what is hearsay, especially like under the best of conditions.
Yeah.
When you're talking about something that's nearly 200 years old, right? But when you add in people with agendas to discredit, it makes it even more complicated to sort through those sources. I will say that, from what I've seen, it seems like, it happened. It seems like, and I don't know exactly what to make of it, but the way I kind of resolved it in myself is that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't, like, an imperfect man does not negate a system that is developed from, I know not from that man, but as a result of that man's
Work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Those are great points. A few things that I often tell people as I'm working with different people is let's start from a base that we can all agree with, right? And sometimes I'll ask people, I'll say, so you think that the church is not true because of polygamy? The Lord couldn't accept that in his church. And they say, yeah, I don't think that's right. I'll say, okay, then you just don't believe the Bible. You just don't. Abraham, Isaac, like you go through the list and then you look at others and you say, what about some that even made gigantic mistakes prophets that made gigantic mistakes in the scriptures? David, and he was the prophet, and so I think starting from that base of understanding what a prophet is and how the Lord uses all of us as imperfect people, I think is an important place to start, and so that we can at least just not reject it wholesale. But then I also think we are making a big mistake if our view of Joseph Smith is, yeah, he wasn't perfect, but I guess he was the prophet. And I think that's way wrong too. I think he was an incredible prophet. And I think, especially with polygamy, I think he was doing exactly what the Lord had commanded him to do. But I think it's okay to start with a base of, okay, there are things in the gospel that I cannot understand, and that's all right. And the Bible examples of polygamy are a perfect example of that. I just don't get that, but apparently that's okay. That's in the Bible, and then we can start building from there. It's kind of like just kind of deepening your why over time and your understanding of the restoration and of Joseph Smith. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I'll just tell you flat out, like I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet, but I'm able to look at it and say, like, well, regardless of what he as a man did or did not do, what resulted from his work was what I considered to be a perfect church.
It seemed that a lot of your gospel learning and testimony was very practical. Like one of the things you were looking up in the beginning is like, what churches have the lowest divorce rates?
Yeah.
Like you were very practical in your search at religion, just like who has good outcomes? Let's start there.
Yeah.
And work backwards. And obviously, we want a personal relationship with Heavenly Father in our own testimony. But I like that that outlook you have. It can help to learn. Especially looking at Joseph Smith, like, okay, even if I don't understand the actions, I know the result was good, so can't be too bad,
Right.
So that's a good place to start from.
Yeah, and it's by their fruits you shall know them, right? It's how Christ said to discern between false prophets and good prophets.
Right.
It's by their fruits. And so I think that's exactly what you've done. I always laugh thinking about kind of when you decided, okay, I could look into the LDS Church. It was after having given up coffee for totally different reasons. You're like, whoa, I feel better. Wait, there's a church that says not to drink coffee. Maybe, kind of by their fruits, same type of thing. You're like, well, maybe they do actually have something. Maybe they're not crazy.
Yeah. It was the one, we'll call it denomination, that I did not seriously look into for like 3 years of, I'm not saying adamant searching, but idle searching. Yeah.
And what was your preconceived notion of the church? I don't know that I've ever heard you say that.
That could be its own video.
This is where I will offend
Like,
you.
did you have much knowledge of it, or very high level?
I would say I had like Book of Mormon musical knowledge of the church, if I could call it that. Like, I've never seen the Book of Mormon musical, but like I would say
South Park novel knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, it was where you point out the things that maybe that seem odd when compared to a secular perspective. But not enough knowledge to speak, closely on it. I think that our only experience was with the LDS Church was like missionaries that came and mowed my mother-in-law's yard for like a month or two whenever they were having rough times. Like that was the primary one-on-one interaction that I had ever had with a member of the church.
And what did you think of that? Did it feel maybe like, did it feel like good, honest service, or did it feel like, oh, maybe these people are salespeople?
That depends on, the date and time that you would have asked me about it. I think it started out being like, look, who do these people think they are, going around mowing other people's lawns, doing nice things for them? What are they trying to prove? That was how I would have looked at it, we'll say 5 years ago. And if I'm being honest, and if I'm looking at things now, it's because like service made me uncomfortable. Like, because for my own weaknesses and for my own faults and hypocrisies, it always felt like, oh, well, you're making up for something else.
Yeah. What's the catch?
It's not genuine. Why are you really doing that? Like, what's your motivation? And then, the second layer of that is like, oh, you're just doing that so you can get exaltation. Or I would have phrased
That's all
it
it takes. You just have to mow somebody's lawn, you get exaltation.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I started doing acts of service that I started understanding more. And again, whenever I say I understand, I'm not saying that I understand.
Not
I'm just
perfect understanding, right?
Yeah. That it made more sense to me, and I actually kind of got it, I think. And I don't know. It was a very twisted view that I had, and it was built by years of living or decades of living a secular life where you kind of look down on what I now consider to be good things, just unambiguously good. And it takes work to get out of that. Joining the church or thinking about joining the church, because I'm like, who am I to do these things? Who am I to take upon the banner of love and peace, given like those things that I had thought, given the way I've treated people, given, my imperfections, and it was a really hard pill to swallow, and it's still something that I have trouble with.
Mm-hmm.
This hypocrisy is quelled. This hypocrisy is soothed by the atonement. Christ knows that we are imperfect. That is why he did what he did. That is why that we're able to sit here and make mistakes on earth and then be forgiven for it. And I don't fully understand it, but I didn't see that as a component when I was thinking about the hypocrisy before. But the atonement is such a big part of being forgiven for your sin. I mean, it's the entire part of being forgiven for your sins. But without it, you're left with just the hypocrisy, which feels really bad.
Yeah, it's that fresh start when you get baptized and a fresh start every week thereafter.
Exactly.
Right? You get to, okay, well, I messed up again this week. Maybe next week. Maybe next week. Maybe next week. And it's, we keep trying to be a little bit better every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jake, that's a great place to close on, I think. Those were the 6 or perhaps 7 things that I was most worried about when looking into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thank you for listening.